Live NFL trivia every Wednesday night on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern. Come show off your football knowledge for a chance to win cash prizes. Check the link in the description to find out more. And now, on with our feature presentation. One of the most obvious rules of drafting is that you never, under any circumstances, reveal who you are going to draft unless you are the team on the clock. If you do, nothing good can come from it. Now the rest of the league knows who you want, and if a team wants that player, they will do everything in their power to leapfrog you and get them. Then, not only do you look like an idiot, but you make it look like you had to settle for whoever you wound up getting, because they were not your first option. It's good life advice in general, but don't count your chickens before they hatch. And in 1982, Philadelphia Eagles head coach Dick Vermeil did not do that. He did one of the stupidest things that you could do before a draft, and revealed exactly who he wanted. Sure enough, the player he wanted got taken right before him. However, in a crazy twist of fate, the fact that Vermeil and the Eagles made this mistake wound up paying off in a big way. The Eagles actually benefited from this, and the player they wound up settling for turned out to be a star. This is the story behind what has to be the greatest draft mistake in the history of the Philadelphia Eagles. Before I talk about what happened at the draft, we need some context to understand the player in question that the Eagles wanted, and why the Eagles wanted him to begin with. Around the turn of the decade, from the end of the 1970s to the start of the 1980s, you would be hard-pressed to find too many better receivers in football than this man right here. This is Perry Tuttle from Clemson. As a member of the Tigers, he established himself not just as one of the best players in the ACC, and not just as one of the best players in college football, but as one of the best players in the history of Clemson football. And considering how good Clemson football is, that's saying a lot. After not playing a whole lot as a freshman, in 1979, Tuttle made his mark on the conference. He finished the season with 36 receptions for 544 yards and 4 receiving touchdowns, leading the team in all 3 of these categories. What's insane is that Tuttle was literally the only player on Clemson that season to catch a touchdown pass. For his efforts, Tuttle finished 3rd in the ACC in receptions, 3rd in receiving touchdowns, and 4th in yards per catch. And he followed that up in 1980 with an even better season, where he caught 53 passes for 915 yards and 4 touchdowns. He was in contention for the best receiver in the conference in 1979, but by 1980, there was no disputing. It was Perry Tuttle. Tuttle led the ACC in both receptions and receiving yards, becoming just the 2nd player in Clemson history, alongside Jerry Butler in 1978, to top the conference in both of these categories in a single season. But he saved his best for last when in 1981, he caught a career-high 8 touchdowns, ranking 8th in the NCAA and 2nd in the ACC. He had 17 yards per reception, which ranked 3rd in the conference. He had over 22 yards per kickoff return, which ranked 1st in the conference, and he had 52 receptions for 883 yards. Once again, Tuttle led the ACC in receptions and receiving yards. He became the first player in Clemson history to lead the conference in receptions twice, and became the 2nd player in ACC history, alongside Virginia wideout Fred Pulzer in the 1950s, to accomplish this feat. Not only was he the first player in ACC history to have consecutive seasons as the league leader in receptions and receiving yards, but more importantly, he was an instrumental part in helping Clemson finish the 1981 season undefeated, helping them win their first national championship ever. After 4 seasons with Clemson, Tuttle, with 150 receptions for 2,534 yards and 17 touchdowns, along with a national championship and some conference accolades, had established himself as a school legend. And when the 1982 NFL Draft rolled around, there were definitely some teams who had their eye on him. Let's call it for what it is. The Philadelphia Eagles were absolutely infatuated with Perry Tuttle. In 1981, the Eagles were coming off of a Super Bowl appearance and still put together a pretty solid offense that finished 5th in points per game. However, the passing game needed some work. The Eagles finished 20th in the league out of 28 teams in passing yards, and over their final 6 games, including the playoffs, they had less than 200 yards passing in 5 of them, and less than 140 yards in half of them. Their anemic passing game was a big reason why, after starting the season with a 9-2 record, they finished 10-6 and went 1-done in the postseason. The receivers were also getting pretty old. Harold Carmichael was a future Hall of Fame wideout, and he had over 1,000 yards receiving in 1981, which was the 3rd time in his career that he accomplished that feat. But he was going to be 33 years old by the time the 1982 season was underway, and he probably didn't have a whole lot left in the tank. The same went for their 2nd leading receiver in Charlie Smith, who was going to be 32 years old when the season started and would never play in the NFL again after that 1981 campaign. If Philadelphia had any good receivers on their team, they were receivers who were on the wrong side of 30, which is what made getting Tuttle, a fast guy who could go deep and had surefire hands, a necessity to them. And Dick Vermeil loved Perry Tuttle and needed Perry Tuttle so much that he just had to tell someone about it. Enter Buffalo Bills head coach Chuck Knox. Vermeil and Knox were friends and had a personal relationship with each other. In 1973, when Knox was the head coach of the Los Angeles Rams in his first season in charge there, Vermeil was the special teams coach, as well as the offensive backs coach. The two men talked pretty regularly, and during this conversation, Knox asked Vermeil what he was going to do during the draft. Now, Vermeil could have said, I can't talk about that, or could have been very vague about how he's still finalizing his draft board, or could have even gone as far as saying that he was targeting certain positions without giving away any specific names. But nope, Vermeil flat out told Knox, "We're taking Perry Tuttle." Spoiler alert, they did not get the chance to take Perry Tuttle. You might be asking yourself why the heck Vermeil would say something like that. Well, he thought he had nothing to worry about. Number one, the Bills had a very solid receiving unit consisting of Frank Lewis, who, while on the older side of things, made the Pro Bowl in 1981 with over 1,200 receiving yards, and Jerry Butler, a Clemson receiver who had his best year statistically speaking in 1981 and made the Pro Bowl in 1980. While the Bills had some needs to fill, it didn't seem like wide receiver was too pressing of a need, at least not in the first round. So in that department, Vermeil thought he was safe. But perhaps more importantly, the Bills had a lower draft pick than the Eagles. Whereas the Eagles had the 20th pick in the draft, the Bills had the 21st. In Vermeil's eyes, it didn't really matter what he said, because there was nothing the Bills could do about it. However, during this conversation, Vermeil completely forgot about the fact that teams make trades. They move up and down during the draft. The Eagles still felt like they had nothing to worry about. When the 19th pick in the draft rolled around, Tuttle was still on the board, and the Eagles were one spot away from getting their man. The Broncos had the pick, and considering the fact that their starting receiving unit with Steve Watson and Rick Upchurch was good and relatively young, Tuttle was not going there. Except, the Bills called up the Broncos and leapfrogged the Eagles. Buffalo gave them a 4th round pick in exchange for moving up 2 spots. And when the Bills pulled off the trade, at that exact moment, Vermeil realized he screwed up. He knew what was coming next. The man that he raved about to Chuck Knox was now going to be Chuck Knox's player. With the 19th pick of the draft, the Buffalo Bills took Clemson wide receiver Perry Tuttle. Knox talked in the post-draft press conference about how he had Tuttle ranked as the 4th best player on the board, and couldn't pass up the opportunity to get him. But we all know that the only reason they traded up to get him instead of just hoping he'd fall 2 more spots was because he knew that the Eagles were going to snatch him up if he didn't. Vermeil said afterwards that even though they liked the player they wound up choosing, that they were going to take Tuttle if Buffalo didn't make that trade. You could tell he was disappointed that he had to settle and couldn't get his man. That raises the question, who did the Eagles settle on? Well, his name was Mike Quick. Before I talk about what Quick actually did, I cannot stress enough how disappointed Vermeil was that Knox did this to him and that he couldn't get Tuttle. Even if Vermeil tried to put on a brave face, he couldn't do it. One reporter said that in Vermeil's 7 seasons in Philadelphia, it was the first and only time he could ever remember Vermeil not saying something along the lines of, "This was the guy we wanted all along." As a report said, he could not hide his disappointment. Vermeil could be completely transparent sometimes, and that was one of them. Maybe it was the betrayal by Knox more than the pick itself, but Vermeil just couldn't let it go. Much to everyone's disappointment, the Eagles were settling for Mike Quick. And settling for Mike Quick was one of the greatest things to ever happen to the franchise. Seriously. When I talk about the greatest draft mistake in the history of the Eagles, I'm talking about a mistake that actually turned out to be beneficial. I'm talking about a mistake that wound up paying off in a big way, and ended up working out way better than the original plan. And to say that this applies with Mike Quick would be the understatement of the century. From 1983 to 87, Quick made the Pro Bowl in 5 consecutive seasons. He was named a first-team All-Pro twice. In just his 2nd season, in 1983, he led the league with 1,409 receiving yards. He had double-digit receiving touchdowns 3 times, and he played 9 seasons with the team, being a pretty productive player in most of them. Today, Quick is considered by many to be one of the greatest receivers in the history of the Eagles. Now that Carmichael is in the Hall of Fame, Quick might be the greatest Eagles receiver of all time who isn't currently enshrined in canon. He was named the first-team All-Pro twice. He scored a 99-yard touchdown against the Atlanta Falcons in an overtime victory in 1985, becoming the first and only player ever to have a 99-yard touchdown in an overtime period. He finished inside the top 8 in the NFL in receiving touchdowns 5 times, and by the time his career ended, he had 363 receptions for 6,464 yards and 61 touchdowns. At the time of his retirement, he was 4th in franchise history in receptions, 3rd in franchise history in receiving yards, and 3rd in franchise history in receiving touchdowns. I think it's safe to say that the Eagles hit a home run with this draft pick, and that's more than the Bills can say about Perry Tuttle. The last time the Bills drafted a wide receiver in the 1st round out of Clemson back in 1979, which they used to select Jerry Butler, it worked out pretty well. Butler was a pretty solid, dependable receiver who played in Buffalo for nearly a decade. When they tried to make lightning strike twice with Tuttle, it didn't happen. In fact, many people consider Perry Tuttle to be one of the biggest draft busts, if not the biggest draft bust, in the over 60-year history of the franchise. He was that bad. As a rookie in 1982, he had just 7 receptions for 107 yards and no touchdowns. You could chalk that up to the strike and being buried on the depth chart. Heck, Mike Quick did not have a good 1982 season either. But whereas Quick improved in 1983 and led the league in receiving yards, Tuttle did not do that. Tuttle produced next to nothing. In 1983, he had 17 receptions for 261 yards and 3 touchdowns. Prior to the start of the 1984 season, the Bills, after just 2 seasons, cut ties with Tuttle and traded him to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Bucs then let him go to the Atlanta Falcons, and after 1984, he never played in the NFL again. By the time his career in Buffalo ended, he had a grand total of 24 receptions for 368 yards and 3 touchdowns. That was all the Bills could muster out of a top 20 pick at the receiver position. Eagles fans and Dick Vermeil may have been upset in the immediate aftermath of the 1982 NFL Draft, but they were thanking their lucky stars shortly after that things worked out the way that they did. If Vermeil kept his mouth shut, they would have wound up with Perry Tuttle, and it likely would have been a disaster. But because Vermeil made the grave mistake of revealing who he was going to take in the draft, he wound up settling for a 5-time Pro Bowler who turned out to be one of the greatest offensive players in the history of the franchise. As Quick said on the whole thing in retrospect, they picked me as a consolation, and it has been a beautiful thing. And I'm sure every Eagles fan would say the same exact thing, because as far as consolation prizes go, it's tough to do much better than what Philly did in 1982. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot, and be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL Trivia and win cash prizes, link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at JaguarGator9, and subscribe to 60-Second NFL History on YouTube. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.